Okay, so today we will be talking about functionalism. So, there are three branches of thought I would like to cover in this lecture. The first two we're going to cover very briefly because we've gone over them in previous lectures. So, symbolic interactionism, conflict theory, and functionalism. These are three very central branches of sociological thought. All right, so symbolic interactionism. This is a branch of thought that focuses on the small scale, everyday interactions between individuals. It argues that people create meaning through social interaction, especially through symbols like language, gestures, and shared norms. This perspective highlights how our understanding of reality is shaped through these ongoing interactions rather than being fixed or purely structural. Reality is thought to be socially constructed, and meaning is created through interaction. Then we have conflict theory. Conflict theory sees society as fundamentally unequal, with different groups, competing for power and resources like wealth, status, and influence. It emphasizes that social structures often benefit dominant groups while disadvantaging others. For example, economic systems may favor the wealthy, reinforcing inequality. Conflict theorists argue that tension between groups drives social change rather than stability. This is a school of thought often associated with Karl Marx. It is a perspective that focuses on inequality, power differences, dominant groups as opposed to subordinate groups and their possession of control, and how social change arises from conflict. If you recall, in the Communist Manifesto, Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels told us that the history of all hitherto society was a history of class struggle. And then finally, there is functionalism. Functionalism views society like a machine or an organism where all the different parts of that whole, such as education, family, government, religion, all of these facets work together to keep society running smoothly. Each part has a function that contributes to overall stability and social order. So schools don't just teach knowledge, they also socialize individuals and prepare them for the workforce. Functionalists are mainly concerned with how societies maintain balance and what happens when that balance is disrupted. It is a school of thought associated with Auguste Comte, as well as Herbert Spencer and Emile Durkheim. So, sociology was born in the aftermath of the French Revolution of 1789. With the French Revolution, there came quite a bit of chaos, you could say, a very dramatic societal changes. Some have described it as a period of social turmoil where virtually everything was turned upside down. Large feudal estates were being eroded. Workers were leaving the countryside for industrial jobs in urban centers. New forms of less aristocratic government were replacing the old nobility. Sociology was developed as a reaction to this turmoil, as a reaction to try to cast order when there was a sense of disorder. And it was done so through the use of I should more say the aspiration toward being able to use the scientific method, to have a science of society in order to be able to restore order when there was chaos and bring stability and equilibrium to a period of instability. So we have talked about Auguste Comte, who gave us the word sociology. He was a French mathematician and philosopher who was born in the aftermath of the French Revolution. He was, living through the residue of this chaos, and Comte wished to restore social equilibrium, social stability, and social cohesion. He wanted to restore order, and he felt that the way that we can do that is if we were to develop a scientific or positivist understanding of society, to move sociology to be on an equal plane with the hard sciences, physics, chemistry, etc. Of course, today we know that this was a rather, let's say, ideal of utopian scientism. It's an impossibility for sociology to be able to reach this type of positivist stage in the way that Comte would have liked it. Most functionalist theories hold a notion of there being a good society which fosters social stability and order. There are objectives of social integration and social cohesion that are often talked about from the functionalist perspective. Society, like I said before, is very much viewed as an organism, and it is the purpose of the functionalist social scientist to uncover the purpose of society's facets. What needs do they satisfy? How do these things function and bring about equilibrium? All right. Herbert Spencer, a new name for us here, was an English social scientist. He coined the term survival of the fittest. Many think that was Charles Darwin, the man who created the theory of evolution, though it was actually the social scientist Herbert Spencer. Many have made comparisons to Spencer and Comte, even sort of equating the two, though Spencer would have, or I should just say did, push back very hard against this equation. He wanted to separate himself from Comte. Perhaps I don't have a theoretically sensitive enough mind, but I have to tell you that when I read Spencer and Comte, I cannot really decipher too significant of a difference in their logics. However, he insisted that he was separate from Comte, though you have to keep in mind that philosophers have reputational motives and like to present themselves as being novel. Uh, Spencer maintained that the social whole operates through the integration and cooperation of its parts. If a social scientist wants to understand the structures of society, Spencer claimed, they would have to understand the needs that those structures satisfy. They need to understand the purpose, the function of those structures. A functionalist might critique a conflict theorist for only focusing on ways in which we could change these structures, only focusing on, let's say, the inequality or the power imbalances of these structures and focus on how we could improve those. The functionalist would maybe say, to sort of flip the Marxist adage on its head, that the point of being a social scientist is to understand society, not to change it. If you're only focused on changing society, then perhaps you can't actually have a good understanding of it if you do not understand the purpose of the social structures that constitute the social whole. That would be the perspective of a functionalist, though conflict theorists would push back against that. There's part of the reason that a conflict theorist might push back against that is that of the functionalist perspective, if you extend its logic, it has some sort of implications from the interpretation of some that could be seen as controversial because it could be seen as justifying structural outcomes, including outcomes such as inequality. This paired with the fact that Spencer was using this notion of the survival of the fittest, where the quote-unquote fittest of human beings tend to occupy coveted positions. This was a line of thought that was of course, associated with social Darwinism. Some, though, however, say that that comparison between Spencer and social Darwinism is a little bit unfair and overly simplistic. For the key elements of Spencer's thinking, I will direct you to page 13. The authors break those down bullet by bullet. I'm not going to read it in this slide, but if you would like, they have it pretty clearly marked on page 13 for you. All right. Emil Durkheim, who we've talked about, was concerned with social order, social cohesion. He was very much influenced by Auguste Comte. He, like Comte, thought that we need to create a scientific sociology, a discipline focused on understanding society and one with a scientific character. And that this science of society would be able to foster social order and social integration. For Durkheim, social facts should not be sought among the states of individual consciousness, meaning we should not sort of accept a micro-individual level analysis when we want to understand society. Instead, he would contend that there is a quote-unquote body social that must be studied scientifically in order to establish laws. As I've said in previous lectures, this I would say maybe infantile will to establish laws in the social sciences is widely rejected as a possibility for the social sciences today, perhaps with the exception of a couple of stubborn people who are sticking to the positivist camp, not only in sociology, but also, of course, notably economics. Durkheim was concerned with the functions of society's facets, meaning understanding the purpose these facets serve, the needs that social structures satisfy. He made the case that when social solidarity is not achieved, forms of social pathology and anomie, that being a state of social isolation, manifest themselves. Anomie, Durkheim used in his theory of why people commit suicide as well as why people commit crime. There's some mixed results on both of those topics as to the extent to which anomie relates to criminal behavior and suicide. I should also say that there are some mixed results, speaking more to my wheelhouse of understanding radical parties. There is a demand-side perspective. We talked about what that meant in a previous lecture, and how anomie is associated with supporting radical parties. I want you to turn to page 20, as I do so myself. Yeah, so right in the middle of the first paragraph on page 20, the authors write, "It becomes increasingly difficult," Durkheim observed, "to integrate with the common idea system-wide varieties of occupations located in the separated institutions, government, law, family, religion, community, education, and economy. In traditional societies, the diversity of occupations is less, and for the most part, activity is carried out within the institution of kinship. Distinctive and separate institutions of government, economy, and education do not become highly differentiated from kinship, and thus integration and social cohesion can be maintained by acceptance of and adherence to one common idea system." So we talked a lot about Durkheim's perspective on religion, so I'll go over some of those points relatively briefly here, but if you want a refresher, please turn to that previous lecture when we discussed the elementary forms of religious life. Durkheim got into a bit of trouble for describing religion as a social phenomena, putting it in social terms as opposed to theological terms or divine terms. He put forth a sociological analysis of religion, which is hardly controversial to do today, but at the time this was relatively, let's say, outside the box. He described religion as having a great regulating function in society. He applied this functionalist perspective, this social needs meeting perspective to the matter of religion. He believed that religion provided social integration, and he analyzed religion in its elementary or simplest form. Some might take issue with that characterization, given the community of the Australian Aborigines that he was studying. From his perspective, he wanted to understand religious ritual in a form in which complexities were discarded. Those types of complexities in modernized context sort of muddied the analysis, and to find common elements between, let's say, the elementary forms of religious life and the more religious practice in more modernized and complicated contexts. Some would say that this is a relatively perhaps ethnocentric viewpoint. There's this argument that the Australian Aborigines that he was studying were actually quite complex and rich in culture and whatnot. So that's just a debate to push to the side, but to briefly acknowledge for now. So Durkheim said that religious beliefs symbolize society. When the worshipper believes that they are worshiping God or the sacred or supernatural realm, they are actually worshiping the moral harmony with their neighbor, the society that they live in, and the social integration that they feel within a community. Religion, he says, provides a common set of ideas and fulfills this function of solidarity. It is through religion that social integration and collective effervescence come about. I'm being brief here on this slide because we've already talked about all of these aspects of Durkheimian thinking on religion for about a half hour, 45 minutes in a previous lecture. Talcott Parsons published The Structure of Social Action in 1937. This would be a book that understood social action as being 1, goal-oriented, 2, involving the selection of appropriate means among alternatives, 3, regulated by ideas, and 4 as being circumscribed by physical biological parameters. Parsons would seek to identify the key dimensions of human organization in this book. A society can be conceptualized as having mechanisms to realize stability. He offers mechanisms of socialization and mechanisms of social control. There's a segment covering those mechanisms on page 73 that I would like you all to read. Values and beliefs give humans common assumptions with which to define situations, as well as to provide them with guidance on how to act. And I would like you to turn to page 75 to please read more about how values and beliefs act as that sort of guidelines for human behavior.